expert in Russian security and military strategies. Ivana Stradner is a research fellow at the Foundation for Defense of Democracy's Russia program in Washington, D.C. It's great to have you with us to get into all of the details of this story, Ivana. Now, that soundbite that we just heard was full of jargon, so maybe you can break that down for us. What message is the Kremlin sending, both domestically and internationally, with this move?
Indeed, Russia just passed a law basically allowing the Kremlin legally to send troops to protect Russian citizens abroad. I think it's extremely important to emphasize that this is nothing new. And if you go back to Russia's full-scale invasion, that's exactly Russia used domestic law also to justify its invasion in Ukraine. But not only there, also in 2014 and 2008 in Georgia. And now, why does it matter right now? As you mentioned, it matters for two reasons, both domestically and internationally. Domestically, to portray Russia as once again a savior of Russian citizens, given that Putin is struggling domestically, and internationally because, make no mistake, Putin is getting ready to challenge NATO and Article 5. And that's exactly also what the German intelligence and also other Western intelligence, as well as the intelligence from the Baltics, have been warning over the past few months.
And how significant is this as a law change? Do you think that it's mainly symbolic, or does it mark a real shift in policy?
I think when you think about Russia using law, it's quite really ironic, given that Putin is waging its illegal war of aggression in Ukraine. So it's not that Russia deeply cares about the morality or legality of its actions. This just emphasizes the fact that Russia needs some sort of a justification domestically to justify its next steps. But also, I think this is a psychological game also for the West to scare the Western allies, given that Putin has been threatening also in the Baltic states with its hybrid war. For example, over the past few months, we experienced Russian sabotage activities in the West, Russian drone incursion in Poland, also in the Baltic states, cutting sea cables. And make no mistake, as Putin is right now losing on the battlefield and struggling domestically, economically, and it looks like the United States will put more pressure now to end the war in Ukraine. Putin is trying to escalate and then to de-escalate and to show that Russia can be the one, as a reliable partner to the United States. That's an old Putin's game, psychological game, and that's why I'm very actually concerned about this law.
And I guess you could argue that it's a response to international legal pressure, like the ICC warrant that's been put on Putin. Do you think that that would give him essentially a mandate, domestically at least, for the case where if he was arrested, that he could also be saved by his own army?
Look, a lot of Western analysts are today focusing on the ICC, given that the ICC already announced going after the Russian regime. But it's not only about that. Actually, there are Russian shadow fleet that the Western countries have been trying to stop, and there are sanctions. But also there is something else going on in the Baltic states, something that I've been following, which is, for example, Narva and what's happening in Estonia, and Russia using this particular law as a possible justification to so-called protect Russian citizens living abroad. And when you also add into this calculation what's happening on the border with Belarus, these are clear signs that Putin is preparing his next steps. And I want to emphasize one other thing. A lot of Western analysts think that Putin cannot even win the war in Ukraine, so how can he even challenge the West and NATO member states? It's actually not that difficult, because Russia has already been challenging NATO in the Baltic states, in Poland, and through sabotage activities across the West. And NATO has not responded. So I do believe that he might actually proceed with his next steps somewhere in the Baltic states with a similar so-called little green man scenario, just below the threshold of war, and to show that NATO will not respond. And if you put that also in the context that Russia allies Serbia, there were massive protests in Kosovo, and 90 NATO peacekeepers were reportedly injured several years ago, and NATO didn't respond. That tells you all you need to know, that Putin absolutely understands that NATO is divided. And that's precisely why right now it's extremely important that the United States and our European allies act in one voice, that we strengthen our hybrid warfare teams within NATO, and to tell Putin and send a clear signal that he will bear the consequences of any